Most of what Christians know about Jesus comes from the New Testament. So why should we care about what Roman historians, governors, and biographers wrote about him and his followers? In this episode, I want to talk about why those outside voices matter, and how they can actually strengthen, not weaken, the Christian story. Let's start with a simple distinction. There are inside witnesses and outside witnesses. Inside witnesses are people who followed Jesus, loved him, worshiped him, and wrote the Gospels and letters. Outside witnesses are people who did not believe in him, but still had to deal with his movement. The New Testament is inside testimony. Roman writers like Tacitus, Pliny, and Suetonius are outside testimony, and both kinds of witnesses matter. In my book, Roman Writings About Jesus Christ, I walk through what these Roman sources can and can't do. Here's what they can do. They can confirm that Jesus existed and was executed under Pontius Pilate. They can show that a movement of Christians spread quickly through the empire. They can reveal how Roman officials and elites perceived this strange new group. But there are also things they cannot do. They cannot replace the Gospels as full biographies of Jesus. They cannot give us a neutral, emotionless account. Most of these authors are annoyed, puzzled, and even hostile. And that is exactly what makes them so interesting. Think about it this way. When someone who dislikes a movement still confirms basic facts about it, that's significant. Roman authors, they have no interest in promoting Christianity. Sometimes they mock it. Sometimes they openly condemn it. And yet they still say things like, there was a man called Christ. He was executed under Pontius Pilate. His followers kept worshiping him and spreading his message. Their hostility actually makes their agreement with key Christian claims more compelling. So here's the key point. These Roman sources are not in competition with the New Testament. They're doing something different. The New Testament tells us what Jesus taught and what his followers experienced. Roman sources show us how the broader world saw him and his people. When you put them together, you get a thicker, more three-dimensional picture of early Christianity. So, Roman writings about Jesus matter because they give us an outside perspective, often hostile, always interesting, that lines up with the heart of the Christian story. In the next episode, we'll meet two of the most important voices. Tacitus, a hostile Roman historian, and Josephus, a reluctant Jewish historian writing under Roman rule. I'm Sean Armstrong. See you in episode 2. In this episode, we're going to listen to two men who did not follow Jesus. Tacitus, a proud Roman senator and historian, Josephus, a Jewish historian working under Roman patronage. Neither of them is trying to promote Christianity, but both of them end up preserving important details about Jesus and his followers. Let's start with Tacitus. Tacitus writes about the Great Fire of Rome under Emperor Nero. He reports that Nero blamed a group called Christians to divert suspicion away from himself. Tacitus calls Christianity a superstition. He clearly despises it, but in the process, he tells us things like there was a man called Christus. He was executed during the reign of Tiberius. The execution was carried out by Pontius Pilate. And the movement started in Judea, but spread all the way to Rome. Tacitus does not believe the Christian message, but from the outside, he confirms the basic outline the Gospels give us. Now, Josephus was a Jewish commander who surrendered to Rome and later wrote history under Roman patronage. He's not a Christian. He has his own agenda, defending his people and explaining their history to Roman readers. Yet he mentions James, the brother of Jesus, and calls Jesus the one called Christ. There's also a passage that most scholars agree has later Christian additions, but at its core seems to acknowledge Jesus as a wise man, a teacher, and someone crucified under Pilate. Scholars debate the exact wording, but most agree that Josephus had some basic non-Christian knowledge of Jesus and his followers. So, why do these two writers matter together? Tacitus and Josephus are writing for different audiences, coming from different backgrounds, not copying the New Testament. Yet both of them place Jesus at the right time during the reign of Tiberius, place him in the right place, Judea, connect him with Pontius Pilate, and recognize that his followers kept preaching after his death. That's exactly the framework the Gospels give us. Here's the crucial thing. Neither Tacitus nor Josephus gains anything by inventing a crucified Jewish teacher. They mention Jesus because his movement was real. It caused trouble or interest, and they felt they had to explain it to their readers. Their hostility and their reluctance underscore the point. Jesus is not a legendary figure invented only inside Christian circles. He's a figure who forced himself into the record of people who didn't believe in him. We've heard from a hostile Roman historian and a reluctant Jewish historian. In the next episode, we'll shift from books about history to the courtroom and the streets, letters from a Roman governor, and brief notes from a biographer to see what Christianity looked like at ground level. I'm Sean Armstrong. See you in episode 3. So far, we've heard historians looking back on events. Now we're going to listen to something more immediate. A Roman governor trying to figure out what to do with Christians, and a biographer mentioning them in passing. Pliny and Suetonius shows us what Christianity looked like from the street and the courtroom level. Pliny the Younger was a Roman governor in what is now Turkey. He writes a letter to the emperor basically asking, there are these people called Christians. Some say they used to be Christians, others still are. What do I do with them? From his letter we learn some important details. Christians met on a fixed day before dawn. They sang hymns to Christ and to a God as to a God. They bound themselves by oath not to commit crimes but to live moral lives. They shared ordinary meals together. Pliny calls Christianity a contagion, something spreading through society. But he admits he finds no serious crimes, just stubborn loyalty to this Christ. Suetonius, a Roman biographer, mentions disturbances in Rome connected to someone called Christus, likely a reference to Christ filtered through a Roman ear. His notes are brief and not friendly. He sees Christianity as a troublesome superstition that causes unrest. But again, he confirms that the movement was present, it stirred controversy, and it was notable enough to get mentioned in a work about emperors. But Pliny and Suetonius together, and you get a sense of what Rome saw when it looked at Christians. To Rome, Christians looked stubborn. They refused to worship the traditional gods or the emperor. Strange, they worshipped a crucified man as divine, and mixed morally harmless in some ways, but socially and religiously suspicious. Rome worried less about their private beliefs and more about their refusal to join public religious life and their loyalty to a lord higher than Caesar. These texts remind us of something important. Early Christians were not living in a safe, private religious bubble. They were watched, interrogated, and sometimes punished. Their faith had public consequences. It affected who they worshipped, how they met, and what they refused to do. The Roman world saw Christianity as morally peculiar and politically suspicious. We've now seen how Romans wrote about Christians in history, biography, and official letters. In the next episode, we'll step back and ask, why did the Roman state persecute Christians in the first place? What made this small, mostly peaceful religious movement worth punishing? I'm Sean Armstrong. See you in episode 4. In Unveiling the Divine, I trace how persecution of Christians developed in the Roman Empire. In this episode, we'll ask a simple question. Why did Rome care? What made a small, mostly peaceful religious movement dangerous enough to persecute? First, remember Rome's basic goal, order and unity. Rome was not interested in purifying people's souls. It was interested in stability. It wanted loyal subjects, respect for the emperor, and participation in public religious life, which was seen as essential for the God's favor on the state. If your religion fit into that system, you were usually tolerated. Christians got into trouble for at least 3 reasons. First, they refused to worship the gods and the emperor. They would not burn incense to the emperor or join in sacrifices. That looked like disloyalty and ingratitude. Second, they claimed exclusive allegiance to one Lord. When Christians said Jesus is Lord, that implied that ultimate loyalty was not to Caesar. In a world where religion and politics were tightly woven together, that sounded dangerous. Third, they formed close-knit communities across social boundaries. Slaves and free, men and women, different ethnicities, meeting together as equals. That kind of unity could look subversive. They weren't plotting a violent revolution, but Rome wasn't sure. In Unveiling the Divine, I talk about the pattern of persecution. Sometimes it was local, clashes between Christians and local elites, guilds, or neighbors. Sometimes it was imperial, emperors or officials issuing broader policies. Persecution could be intense but local, short-lived but brutal, and often tied to crises, fires, wars, plagues, moments when Christians made an easy scapegoat. Underneath it all was a question of loyalty. Can you be fully loyal to Rome if you refuse its gods and the emperor cult? Can you pledge absolute allegiance to Jesus and still fit into a system that expects religious participation as a civic duty? Many Christians answered with their lives. They would pray for the emperor, but they would not worship him. That was a line Rome eventually forced them to pay for. Persecution provoked a response, not just in courage, but also in writing and argument. In the next episode, we'll travel to North Africa and meet Christian thinkers who defended the faith with sharp minds and bold pens. I'm Sean Armstrong. See you in episode 5. When we think early Christian theology, we often picture Rome, Jerusalem, or maybe Greece. But in Unveiling the Divine, I highlight something many people forget. Some of the most important defenders of the faith came from North Africa. In this episode, we'll meet a few of them and see how they answered Rome's accusations. First, Tertullian of Carthage. Tertullian was a fiery writer. He defended Christians against charges of immorality and disloyalty. He pointed out the moral failures of pagan society. He famously said something like, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." For Tertullian, persecution wasn't just suffering, it was testimony. The courage of believers under pressure said something powerful about the reality of their faith. Then there was Cyprian, also from North Africa. Cyprian was a bishop who led the church through times of persecution and controversy. He encouraged Christians facing threats and death. He wrestled with questions about believers who had lapsed under persecution and then wanted to return. He worked for unity and discipline in the church. Cyprian showed us that theology doesn't happen only in classrooms. It happens when church leaders make hard decisions under real pressure. These North African voices helped shape Christian teaching on persecution, martyrdom, repentance, and church unity. They reminded us that early Christianity was not just a European story. The faith's intellectual centers were spread all across the Mediterranean world. The African church didn't just receive theology, it produced it. From North African defenders who now turn to a dramatic turning point, the great persecution under Diocletian, the unexpected rise of Constantine, and the Council of Nicaea, which gave us one of the most important Christian creeds. I'm Sean Armstrong. See you in episode 6. In this episode, we're going to move through one of the most dramatic swings in Christian history. We go from one of the worst persecutions the church ever faced to imperial favor under Constantine, to a council that shaped Christian belief for centuries, all in just a few decades. In Unveiling the Divine, I described how Emperor Diocletian launched a severe empire-wide attack on Christians. Church buildings were destroyed, scriptures were seized and burned, leaders were arrested, Christians were pressured to sacrifice to the gods and prove their loyalty. For many believers, it looked like the end, but persecution often had the opposite effect. It clarified who the church was and what it stood for. Then, surprisingly, the empire's stance shifted. Constantine emerged as a powerful ruler who ended official persecution of Christians, granted them freedom and sometimes advantages, showed public respect for the Christian God. Whether Constantine's faith was deep, political, or some mix of both, the effect was clear. Christianity went from hunted minority to favored religion. That raised new questions. How should the church relate to imperial power? What happens when bishops and emperors sit in the same room? With imperial favor came internal conflict coming to the surface. Debates arose about Christ's identity, especially the teachings of Arius, who said the Son was a created being, not fully God. The Council of Nicaea gathered bishops from across the empire to address this. The result was a clear affirmation that the Son is of the same divine reality as the Father, and the beginnings of the Nicene Creed, which Christians still confess today. Persecution had raised the question, are you willing to die for Christ? Nicaea raised the question, who is this Christ you are dying for? In this period, the church learned a hard lesson. Persecution tests courage and loyalty. Imperial favor tests integrity and humility. Both moments, Diocletian's violence and Constantine's favor, forced Christians to ask, what is the gospel? Who is Jesus? And how do we stay faithful, whether the state is attacking us or embracing us? We've heard Rome's voice from many angles, and we've watched the church move from outlaw to council hall. In our final episode of this module, we'll step back and ask, what do we learn from all of this about Jesus, the church, and the nature of Christian faith? I'm Sean Armstrong. See you in episode 7. We've spent this module listening to Rome, historians, governors, biographers, emperors, councils. Now it's time to ask, what do we actually learn from all of this? First, we learn something important about Jesus from Tacitus, Josephus, Pliny, and others. We see that Jesus is not a myth floating outside of time. He appears in the records of people who didn't believe in him. His death under Pontius Pilate and the movement that followed left a mark. Christian faith is not just spiritual philosophy. It's anchored in public, checkable history. Second, we learn something about the church. From Unveiling the Divine, we see how the church behaved under suspicion and interrogation, under brutal persecution, under imperial favor and political entanglement. We learn that faithfulness is possible in hostile cultures. Danger comes not only from persecution, but also from comfort and power. And the church's identity cannot be reduced to its political circumstances. Third, we learn the value of holding inside and outside testimony together. When we read inside sources, the New Testament, early Christian writings, and outside sources, Roman writers, legal letters, imperial edicts, we get a richer picture. Inside, we hear how Christians experienced God, what they believed about Jesus. Outside, we hear how the empire perceived them, how their faith showed up in daily life. Holding both together keeps us humble, historically grounded, and better able to answer honest questions about Christian origins. Finally, why does any of this matter for faith today? Studying Rome and the first Christians gives us courage. If they stayed faithful under interrogation and persecution, we can stay faithful under social pressure or confusion. Clarity. We remember that Christianity has always been public, debated, and sometimes misunderstood. And confidence. Our faith is not built on vague legend, but on events that even hostile witnesses had to acknowledge. The same Jesus who sustained the early church under empire still reigns today, even if our empires have different names. In this module, we have listened to Roman historians, governors, and biographers, watched persecution rise and fall, met North African defenders of the faith, stood at the turning point of Diocletian, Constantine, and Nicaea, and asked what all of this teaches us about Jesus and his church. In the next part of this course, you can move into Revelation and prophecy, or into grace and the Western theological tradition, depending on the path you want your viewers to follow. I'm Sean Armstrong. Thank you for walking with me through Rome and the first Christians. If you've ever wished you could slow down and really walk through the life of Jesus, not just in quick sermons, but through scripture, history, and prophecy together. That's exactly why I wrote the Passion series. Hi, I'm Sean Armstrong, and the Passion series is my 5-book journey into the life, death, and enduring impact of Jesus Christ. Across these volumes, we explore the core message of Christianity and the character of God. The final days of Jesus' earthly life, step by step, from the triumphal entry all the way to the empty tomb. The mysterious world of Revelation with its symbols, its beasts, and the hope of new creation. And the Roman writings about Jesus, voices outside the Bible that will have something important to say. I've tried to bring together pastoral insight and solid historical research in a way that's accessible for pastors, students, and thoughtful lay readers who just want to go deeper. The Passion series is written to help you see Christ with fresh eyes, understand what he has done, and remember why his story still changes lives today. You can find the Passion series in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and Google Play. Just search for The Passion Series Sean Armstrong, or follow the link in the description. If you're ready to go beyond surface level faith, I'd love for you to take the journey with me.